So, Jacques Lion, how you say?
Lion in English.
Lion. So you are a British astrologer who settled in France
Yes.
a long time ago,
Yes, 25 years ago.
and you discovered astrology in France, actually.
Totally in France.
And you told me that until recently you had not read a lot about English astrology.
No, no. All my studies were in French, all the books I read were in French. And it's only maybe the last 2 years or so that I started looking outside what was written in French.
So if I ask you what is the difference between French astrology and the Anglo-Saxon or English American astrology, would you be able to answer, or is it too early?
It's not too early. I think I answered the question a little bit in French earlier. I think the big difference that I seem to understand is the acceptation of the diversity, which maybe you're not totally in agreement with, the acceptation of the diversity of astrology, Anglo-Saxon astrology. And they seem to be much more, of course traditional astrology exists in the US, etc., etc., but they seem to be very oriented towards psychological astrology, that the chart is the reflection of the psyche, etc., etc.
So you told me, for instance, that about asteroids, you said that they are more generally accepted.
Yes, I think so.
And you think that it is part of the modernity of astrology, it's part of the evolution of astrology to integrate new elements, new factors, especially when they come from astronomy. Do you think the astronomers are helping astrology to develop?
That's a good question. I understand what you mean about it's important not to add too much onto astrology and lose the basic idea of the birth chart. But on the other hand, it's not excluded to examine the new discoveries and see if they are applicable to astrology.
Yes. So you don't think that astrology is limited by its origin, for instance? You don't think that the fact that the planet was not known at a certain time is sufficient to refuse it?
That's a very good question, and it comes back to the philosophical question about if you cut a tree down in the forest and you don't hear it, you don't hear the tree fall, did the tree exist, etc., etc. I don't think I'm intellectual enough to be able to answer that question. But whether we discovered Uranus or Pluto or whatever, Neptune, they existed. And it's possible to see the effects now with the ephemerides that go back a bit in time.
They existed, although they were invisible.
They were not discovered, but they existed.
Yes.
But
So you think that the astrology suffered from not knowing those planets before?
No, I don't think it suffered. I think it's the same thing with everything. We work with what we have. We're the product of our time, our age, our culture. We work with what we have at this moment in time. And that each new discovery enables us to look at things differently. Now, whether we take on all the new asteroids, etc., etc., I really don't know for the moment. I'm in the process of...
including the names which are given to the asteroids.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have an opinion about that as well, the names?
Well, I suppose that... So tell me about how you understand the relationship between astrology and astronomy. You think that everything which has an existence, astronomically speaking, should be used by astrologers?
No. I'm a pragmatist. I think you use what you find through experience works.
All right. Do you think that the chart, being something rather complex, does it permit any control of a specific factor? I mean, there are so many interferences and interconnections. It's difficult to say, well, this factor has an effect or not. How would you test the influence of the importance of the factor within a chart?
Through the number of consultations. You've probably got to check it maybe 100 times, maybe over 6 months, I don't know.
Yeah, but how will you know that the role of a certain factor in the chart?
Through dialogue with the client. For example,
yes.
You know certain things about Uranus, and you apply them in the different situations, and you keep a note of the feedback, etc. Because you maybe know the effect of the planet, but you don't know the direct results of the effect of the planet, if you see what I mean. You know that the planet is going to have an impact, but you cannot know as an astrologer exactly how the impact is going to. Do you understand what I mean?
Well, I suppose I understand. Yes, I do. I suppose that theoretically I do understand that, how you proceed. Okay, let's see.
And I suppose I just want to add.
Yes.
I suppose the first thing is you apply it to your own birth chart.
Oh, yeah, of course, yes.
That's the most important one first, and that's probably if you choose a book and you don't know the author. You read what the author has to say and you see if it applies to you, and maybe the book is interesting and you buy it, and then you go into more and more detail.
Sure. You are not afraid of the complexity and the diversity of all these factors?
Yes, of course. It's what I said, you can keep on adding things and adding things. I don't know if it's possible to follow your idea of removing things before you add things in. But I think there does reach a point where you can improve, you can add things on, but you've got to go pretty slowly, I think. Because it's already, if you take the combination of 12 signs, 12 houses, 10 planets, that's already over 1,000 combinations of... Yes, it's already complex, sure.
Yes, you told me before that what can we explain to a client about astrology? What level of complexity can we convey to the client from the point of view of the techniques we are using and how we work?
You asked me this question in French. I'm going to maybe try and explain better, I hope, in English.
Yes.
I used to be a teacher, and that's a very important part, the continuation of astrology of my teaching. Because the big preoccupation of teaching is how to teach something new to the child in the language or in the images that the child will understand. So I think that you can explain the complexity of a birth chart to someone who has no knowledge, if you find the right language and the right method of explaining it.
Yes.
And also, back to this idea of the onion, I don't think you can explain the total complexity of the chart in a first contact with a person either.
Well, until now, it seems that people in the public, they understand more or less what are the 12 signs of zodiac, why at a certain moment it's a certain sign, and why later on it will be another sign. This is a rather basic knowledge that everybody shares.
Yes.
When you ask them about the predictions or the way astrology gives, says about the future, they only say, well, we can read texts about what people write in the horoscope. We don't know all those texts have been written. And finally, they have a very poor understanding of how the astrologers is able to treat events.
But I think that is part of our job, to try and explain the complexity.
But before the complexity, maybe there is a certain simplicity to expose. Why starting by the complexity? Why?
No, I said it's like peeling a layer of an onion.
So
you start with the first layer.
So what would be the first layer actually?
In my particular approach?
Yes.
In my particular approach, it's I start with the energies, the modes, the elements, the configuration that the planets make in the chart, and what we call the dominant planets, plus a basic explanation of what the chart is. And then from the basic generalities, if the client has questions, I answer the questions, and then we go more and more into detail of the problem or whatever that he's come to see about.
Yes, but if we forget the level of the individuals, how do you think astrology? How would you explain the way astrology gives any indications about the way things go in the world? Is there a major factor, a major configuration, a major cycle that you would produce?
In an individual interview?
No, well, I don't make any difference between individual. Even individuals are connected with this general. So, what would be the major constellation in the sense of the major cycle which would dominate all the others, for instance? As you said before, you said that it will depend on each person.
Yes.
So there is nothing which would be accepted by everybody and which would be powerful for everybody.
But we also know that each person, that we're also in a series of collective cycles.
Yes.
For example, Pluto entering Capricorn, etc. And now we have Saturn opposed Uranus and so on.
Yes.
And that's the more general context, if you like.
Yes, that's it. Yes. So you would start by mentioning this.
No, I would start with the individual, generalized explanation of the birth chart. Then maybe go into more details, then put it into a more general context if necessary.
Okay. Yeah.
But it also depends, if you're talking about consultation and we're not talking about classes, it very much depends on what for me, on what the client wants also. And we had this conversation a little bit.
Yes.
We talked about, for example, my second divorce. I know very well that
peut avoir une carafe d'eau, s'il vous plaît?
that I'm a statistic. But as an individual consulting an astrologist, I want to know why I am suffering in particular. Is there a reason to my suffering?
So you will not try to explain to the person that her problems are shared by other people?
Of course I would. Of course I would. You try and keep a balance between the two.
I was suggesting the idea of giving astrology a strategical position, which would mean occupy a certain field, a certain position from which astrology will control a great deal of factors in these positions. And the question of unification, of conjunction. Conjunction is something which speaks very much to the intelligence.
Yes.
But conjunction is also an astronomical reality, but it's also a human reality, a social reality, a sexual reality. So it's something which people can understand very easily, and it's a pity that astrologers don't use this word conjunction as much as they should when they speak about astrology. When they could say, for instance, astrology has something to do with conjunctions.
Yes.
Everything which is to be conjuncted or to be juncted, what has to do with to gather or to separate, it would be very, very eloquent. So I suggest it is a major point, especially because conjunction is also gathering. An assembly is a gathering, a parliament is a gathering, an election is an idea of gathering people.
Yes.
A lot of things have to do with together. To be together, to be conjuncted, to be conjoined, to join.
Yes.
And we should exploit this semantical field of the idea of junction, conjunction, and connection. So,
I think it's a good idea. I think it's an interesting idea. But my only preoccupation is that we have maybe gone so far down the road of diversity that I don't know how we're going to come back to.
Precisely, the dialectic between diversity and conjunction is interesting. Because conjunction is a contradiction with diversity. To conjoin things is to refuse the idea that things are diverse or separate. And there is always in life a moment where we are to accept the idea that what was considered as the past can be to the present, what was considered as being far can be very, very near, etc. So this is one experience of the human condition to be confronted with this idea of having to be confronted with the idea of the confrontation with something which we considered as past or settled or which has the final answer. So conjunction is also something which is repeating. You cannot stay always in conjunction.
Yes.
So in fact, there is always the former conjunction and the next conjunction.
And the separation in between.
Exactly. That's why it's so rich, because in fact, once you consider the idea of conjunction, you are obliged to accept the idea of the end of the conjunction,
yes,
or the idea of the next conjunction.
Yes.
Separation, conjunction, gathering, everything is connected. See? And it is true also for instance, well, I've been working about the Jews. Sometimes they are in dispersion, sometimes they gather.
Yes.
And concentrate, they are dispersed.
Yes.
It's dialectic. And in the life of many people, I think this is an important point. When they meet with someone, when they separate, when they meet again, when they are, they thought they could forget something and then they have to return to it, the return of something. So it's very rich, it's a very rich material.
But it's surely connected to the idea of cycles or spirals.
Yes.
And you come back to maybe you come back to the beginning, but on a different level or a different level of understanding.
Yes. But for instance, what I say also is, what I regret is that astrology has become something which can be very concrete at the level of individuals, and which is not so effective now, today, at the level of the groups.
Yes.
And according to me, astrology is helping the groups to function better. I mean, and if an individual lives if the groups, if the societies have a better organization, it will help to solve many problems with individuals. When you live in a disorganized world, it is also affecting your individual life.
You feel in a way that we've lost a certain sense of community. And your concept of astrology as conjunction.
Yes, and yes, well, I don't think we have lost that. I feel in general people have not lost that. The astrology is disconnected with this level of experience. Is the more terrible. That is, I mean, astrology is so much insisting especially about predictions or provisions.
Okay.
But it's in transit. Oh, you will have a transit at this moment. Okay, but your partner will have a transit at another moment.
Yes.
And other people will have transit at another moment. Everybody, it is as if the life of everybody, the destiny of each of us is disconnected with the life. We are all connected with the cosmos.
Yes.
But between ourselves, we are disconnected. Because each person has a new calendar which doesn't coincide with the calendar of the other people.
Yes, yes.
And I think it is possibly true at a second level, but what is obvious it is that we share the same calendar somewhere.
Okay, I understand your argument.
And it is very important already that we are conscious of sharing that we are interdependent in terms of time and in terms of events, etc.
You know that there's an association in America to which I belong, and it's very difficult to apply, that want to return to the lunar calendar.
Yes.
And with 1 day a year, which is out of time, which
Yes.
is a sort of collective out of time. I'm very, very interested in this idea, but they're finding it's very difficult to apply at this moment in time. But yes, I understand what you mean. I think it's
No,
interesting.
but what I mean is few people today are not so individually minded as you seem to believe. They have also a very strong collective consciousness and consciousness that we are interdependent, and today more than any time in the past.
No, I believe totally in the concept of interconnectedness, and at the same time, there's a collective movement
So I would
at
say,
different
yeah,
levels.
yeah.
But I'm talking about the problem with astrology now, or maybe the advantage of astrology now, is the complete diversity.
Okay, so the diversity is a part of the cycle.
Okay.
There's a time in the cycle which is a time of diversity. Which is only one aspect, one period of the cycle.
Yes, okay.
And there is another period of the cycle which will diminish the importance of the diversity in behalf of the priority of looking at what is similar between
Yes.
people.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of balance, you see. But what is true is that astrology is more in connection with what connects. And it is when astrology is weak, when the influence of astrology is weak, that the diversity comes. You see.
Okay,
So
that's your
you see what I
theory.
mean? That
Yes,
is, in
yes,
fact,
yes.
the strength of astrology is to unite things.
Yes.
When astrology is weaker,
Yes.
then things are getting disunited.
Okay.
It doesn't mean it's not important. The paradoxically, when astrology is strong, it is when the conjunction is strong. And when the conjunction is weak, well, I think it is inexistent. In fact.
And you think we are in a period of weak conjunction?
No, because now we are actually under conjunction.
Okay.
But when I speak period, I don't speak about period
Of time.
of hundreds of years.
Yes.
It's a matter of few years.
Okay.
I live with a very small cycle of 7 years.
Yes.
So when I say period, it doesn't mean anything.
Yes,
It's
okay.
just not, I'm not going to, we are living, I'm not saying we are entering a new era. No, it's just, there is a time for, like we said in the Bible, a time for this and time for that. But now we have passed a time, we are still in a period of unification, where we have, everything gives us the impression that we are to be submitted to a given destiny, a biblical way, about the diseases, etc. This will lose its strength progressively.
Okay.
The more the conjunction between Saturn and Regulus will be something of the past,
Yes.
the pressure will decrease. And then it will give more room to diversity again, to frontiers of all sorts.
Okay.
And then, of course, at a certain moment, once more conjunction will come back. It's a matter of 7 years. So, in fact, there is a major conjunction of Saturn with a major fixed star every 7 years.
Okay.
After Regulus, there will be Antares, etc., and after Antares for Malut, and after Aldebaran. So it's not an astrology for a long time.
Okay.
You know? So
You're
we
talking
are.
of a cycle of 7 years.
Yeah. So we are not saying, well, now we are entering a long period of nothing like that. It's a rather. It's astrology. I don't believe in astrology with very long periods. You know, 30 years, maybe. No, I'm talking about 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, not more than that. So when I say that there is a time to accept conjunction, well, it's not going to last very long. And when I say we are entering a time of diversification, it's not going either to be too long.
Okay.
It's just a reasonable time. So what I say is that the client, the consultation will change according to the fact we are in a period of conjunction, in a period of disjunction.
Okay.
If you have a client in the last 2 years, for instance, when there was this process of conjunction, the idea of telling him that his life will be connected with the life of other people was the right idea to give him.
Yes.
And it was true.
Yes.
Because he would have discovered how much processes which occur in America can affect France,
Yes.
or what happens in Mexico, etc. We are in a period where we cannot ignore what happens anywhere else. Because there is a sort of circulation movement, which means that we are interdependent. So that is what we have to insist on. Now we are passing to progressively, for example, still the end of the conjunction. But let's say in the next 2 years you can already prepare the person to more diversity than he has known in the past. So you can tell him, okay, in the past, in the last years, you have been under the influence, in the impression that your destiny was not individual.
Yes.
That you could not, that you had to be very much dependent on what happens anywhere else. Now it will change in the sense of you will be more
in
control of what happens in your field, in your environment.
Yeah.
More limited environment, more protectionist, more protected by your specific environment. That will not depend on what happens in another part of the world. So it's important, this idea of being protected. Individualism and protection have something to do. When you are an individual, but I'm not dependent on what happens to someone else, or to somewhere else. So that was not the true thing until now.
Yes.
Now you can return to the feeling of what is far, what is near. While before, what is far may be near. Now it's going to change a little. And also, the people, which is very important in my work, the people what seem to have a tremendous influence. To have a new high. Unity means a small number of people having control.
Sure.
Human control.
Yes.
The end of unity is that more people are in control, and that the people who have the monopoly of control lose this monopoly on behalf of more people.
Yes.
They have to renounce a part of their control they have to share the control with more people.
But don't you see this as parallel to the arrival of Pluto in Capricorn?
Yes, the only problem is that what I say would have been said 30 years ago or 100 years ago. The process of Saturn has nothing to do with Pluto in Capricorn. It happens all the time. It has happened all the time in the last 1,000 years.
Sure, but for the people, for for example, because I agree with you, that we'll take more control instead of a small elite or something like that. Is the first stage is for them to be aware at what point, to what extent they were controlled by a small group of people.
Yes.
So the arrival of Pluto in Capricorn.
Yes, but 7 years ago or 30 years ago that was not Pluto in Capricorn, and I would have said the same. What I say here is about a process which exists all the time, which not exists especially when Pluto is in a special place. You see? And it's exactly what I wanted to tell you. When you try to explain what I say by Pluto in Capricorn, I say it's not necessary. It's not necessary.
Okay.
So you can perfect. It's very interesting what you say, because you could say, well, it's because of Pluto in Capricorn that this and this happens. And I would say, no, it is because of Saturn being in conjunction with this star, and this happens every 7 years, and it has nothing. It doesn't depend in any way of Pluto in Capricorn. That will prove that in fact we can explain what we could explain very simply with a certain basic system. We don't need to explain it through the Trans-Saturnian or Trans-Uranian.
Okay.
Because even when Pluto was in Cancer or in Aries, I would have said exactly the same thing.
Okay. But you don't think the fact that the Trans-Saturnian can add an extra layer of understanding to the situation?
Well, I will answer. It's up to any astrologer to say what he wants to say about
Yes.
that. You see. I mean, as I said, you have to accept the basic model, and then within this model, you can introduce whatever you want, whatever comes. Said Woody Allen. When whatever happens, when it doesn't matter what you can put. As far as you accept the basics, everybody can introduce whatever he thinks in terms of Trans-Saturnians, in terms of charts. But the only point is to confer to every astrologer the same line somewhere, the same line of defense, the same line of explanation, and then to construct within this framework what he wants to construct. But the idea that this framework is necessary and doesn't exist.
And you believe it?
Yeah.
You believe it doesn't exist?
Yes, I believe it exists, but I believe it is not accepted. It does exist, it has already been formulated, but it hasn't been accepted. What would be interesting without us saying that it should be accepted, it's that something should be accepted of the same sort. I mean, if it is not that, let it be something else. But at least something. There could be even a competition between different possibilities. But if everybody would accept the idea of that according to which such a model should exist, it would be already a good point. It is like to elect a new president. It doesn't change the life of people. It's just something they only unite about respecting this president. Inside of the city, inside of the state, people go on more or less as they lived in the past. So let's imagine a society which will not accept the idea of electing someone because they fear that it might change totally their life. It's just a sign that we are accepting the idea of cycle, the idea of return, the idea of unity, and it's a normal sign if it comes from the astrologers who are supposed to be people advocating the idea of cycle and returning periodically to a unity, and afterwards there will be this conjunction for dispersion, etc., etc. Even André Barbeau in his book on Mundane Astrology speaks of that. Concentration of planets, that dispersion of planets, it's already this concept. And this concept is also a applicable to the. What is interesting is when you start speaking in that way, you pass very easily from what happens in the sky and what happens in the society. It's always a matter of conjunction, something which return, something which separate. So it's very concrete, very easy to translate. It's what I said when I said, what can you explain to your client? You can explain to him something like that from time to time there is a major conjunction which forces things to unite and together, and after a certain moment these things are more diverse, more dispersed, and it follows a certain calendar.
Yes, yes.
And that you are within this calendar because sometimes you are really under the control of a small group which imposes its will to everybody.
Yes.
Sometimes you have your role to contradict this. For instance, May 68, for instance, was a very important point of refusal.
Yes.
And refusal is also something which belongs to astrology. But, as I said, I manipulate. It is not astrology, it is anti-astrology. Because it's precisely when astrology is weak that this diversity happens. So it is logical that the astrologers should be capable to speak about the people of the time when they will be free from the stars, in a way, free from this pressure. Because finally the diversity means a lack of pressure. And the pressure is astrological. So when the pressure decreases, it gives more diversity. At the same time, this is a moment where astrology is as weak as possible. So in fact, we could not say that astrology tells us about the diversity of people. We should say that astrology tells us about how people can be gathered and concentrated, and by sort of ricochet, by sort of consequence, when the strength, this pressure decreases, then the time of a sort of diversity arrives and arises. So this is a very tricky situation because in fact diversity is precisely not the proof of astrology. It is a proof of the absurd of astrology. It is like saying, well, for instance, power, you feel power when there is no power. Okay, we start. Hartville Station, railway station. Okay, so we have still a few minutes, Jacques Halbronn.
Okay.
So we'll continue our conversation.
Okay.
So what information do you give to your client about astrology? What do you explain? Do you show the planets of the chart? Do you use astrological terminology, words?
Yes. In the beginning, I explain what their birth chart is. So I explain the different signs. I explain the houses so they recognize. I explain the planets, and I explain the aspects, the red and the blue, and I explain the necessity of having red in your chart, etc., etc. Okay, very important, so that they don't panic when they see a lot of red. And I explain that many great names in history have a lot of red in their chart, and so on and so forth.
All right.
That's the first thing I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
after a cup of coffee or a cup of tea.
I see. Yeah. So the person knows basically our sign, knows
sometimes they know their sign, but they don't necessarily know their ascendant. So I explain a little bit how to recognize.
You use computers for that,
for the calculations now, computer.
Yes.
But otherwise, I print a copy for the client, and otherwise I draw the birth chart by hand.
Yes.
Yes, always. So that I can feel.
Yes.
Denis Laboré had a wonderful expression about creating your espace sacré.
Yes.
And that is my way of creating my espace sacré.
And so you think that an astrologer is only using astrology, or what? Are you influenced by the person that you have in front of you, or do you have any
You're
feelings about her?
You're influenced in the same way as maybe you're influenced by, like I said, I was a teacher originally.
Yes.
It's very difficult to separate your teaching from a certain empathy with a child, and so on and so forth.
Yes,
So
obviously.
it's impossible. So if I have somebody who understands nothing about astrology, and don't forget, I'm a very simple person, and I work in the country. We're not talking about a sophisticated town clientele. We're
No.
talking about farmers sometimes. Okay? So I'm always concerned to try and understand how they see the world, and it's what I talked about, the register that I use.
But on the other hand, probably they're more concerned by the sun and the moon than in town and the city.
They understand certainly rhythm and cycle and that
Yes.
sort of thing. But it's back to the basic problem that's why I agree with what you said about this idea of cycles. And you and I understand this whole idea of cycles. But sometimes if it's the very first contact, depending, you cannot necessarily always talk about cycles. That's my belief. It depends on the person you have in front of you.
You mean the person doesn't care? What is the problem with the cycles according
Some
to you?
people don't care.
What do you mean? That it doesn't help them to know that there are cycles? So cycle isn't the cycle precisely the basis of astrology? So is it?
You and I understand that.
No, but I wonder. I try to understand why people wouldn't be concerned by that. They think that what happens to them is something exceptional, which never happened, which never will come back.
It depends.
They want to feel it exceptional, unique.
No, not exceptional or unique. But I would say that at that moment when they come and see me, many people are in a state of great distress
Yes.
and sufferance.
Yes. Do you think there's a paradox here? Do you think that they have waited too long? Do you think that they have let things develop too much? And it is because it's so difficult now?
Sure, probably, yes, probably. That sometimes maybe we need an event outside ourselves to start questioning, why are we on this planet?
Maybe they want to feel less guilty about what happens to them?
I think there's 1,000,001 reasons in the same way that there's 1,000,001 people.
Yes.
Yes. I certainly did not start questioning the meaning of my own life until I was up to my neck in a difficult divorce.
Yes.
And I like to think I'm not an intellectual, but I like to think I'm relatively intelligent.
Yes.
Now, if you take somebody, a farmer who's never left the region or something like that, and he wants to understand why his wife left him and
Yes.
so on and so forth, for sure he's probably left it too long.
So, do you think that astrology can answer those questions that they are asked to the astrologer?
I think it's a very good question, Jacques. I think that astrology can answer those questions in the sense that you help the person to give a sense of meaning or to understand who he is, where he's coming from, and maybe where he's going.
In this way, the karmic astrology can be useful, in a way, because they try to explain why you have to live this or that, or...
I think that Emmanuel, the work that Emmanuel does, having just finished this course in Belgium with him, is very, very interesting. Now, I don't necessarily want to go completely down the road of karmic astrology, but psychological astrology is definitely my...
So, how will you use psychoastrology to explain to the other person, to understand what happens to her?
That when you have a problem inside yourself, sometimes it's no good changing the external circumstances.
Hmm?
I believe in what Jung says, that the solution is to find a wholeness, an individuation inside you.
Yes, so but you think that this is going to help the person to know that, to live that, or you think more that to explain why it happened? So are you going to help the person by helping the person to understand herself, or by understanding what happens to her?
Both. Both. And I think...
Could you give me an example of the way a person can be helped, confronted to a difficult situation?
Okay.
Or an imaginary example.
If we take an example, yesterday I talked about the young lady whose parents are both doctors, and she went to a management school, and that's not really what she wanted to do.
Yes.
Okay, it's a good example.
She's 30 years old.
Approximately. And she now finds herself continually in a state of depression and frustration and difficulties with relationships, distress.
Yeah. So don't tell me that was an urgent situation for her. It is a sort of
Her
anguish.
example is not necessarily an urgent situation, okay? It's not an example of an urgent situation, but increasingly in a state of distress.
So you will help her by explaining why she was right to look for something else.
Yes.
She was happy.
Yes.
She was right not to be happy with
Yes.
what she has accepted.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And she had something else to do.
Yes. Without necessarily going into a karmic, astrological path.
Well, I think this is a typical example of a rather easy problem to solve for an astrologer. He just has to say, well, you have something else in your chart or your possibilities, and that's it.
Yes, and you have to respect the free will of the person. It's not for me to impose anything.
You think she's going to use that with her environment, with her family? She will say, well, the astrologer has said that and that, so you see...
I don't think she'll talk to her family about it, because both parents are doctors.
Quai numéro 1, le train en provenance de rue à destination d'Amiens va entrer en gare. Éloignez-vous de la bande s'il vous plaît.
I don't expect anything. You just sow a very, very small seed, and maybe it will grow, maybe it won't.
Right.
I have no pretensions about what I do.
And what about other people like farmers? What is their problem?
Finding a wife.
Finding a wife?
Yeah.
It's not that urgent either.
Oh, it's a big problem, huh? It's a big problem.
So they have several possibilities, several charts to show you, or?
It's generally a divorce or something, and life on the farm is very, very difficult. But it basically comes down to relationship problems and problems of communication.
I thought you were speaking about urgent situations, urgent problems.
Yes, urgent in the sense that the person, the example for yesterday is not a good example, but urgent in the sense that the feeling of distress or depression.
You think that if you do not do something now, it will be very difficult?
Yes.
All right.